We came 80 years to claim a new world, only to find our own handwriting on the wall, dated 10,000 years before we were born. I still taste the recycled metal of recycled air when I remember the moment the feed came through. The drone slipped over the Terminator line, engines whispering like frightened ghosts, and there it was, carved into glassy rock sharper than any razor Earth ever forged. I was 19 when we launched, fresh from cryo dreams that smelled of cinnamon and ozone. Now my beard is streaked with gray, hands trembling around a coffee bulb as the bridge fills with a collective hush you could drown in. 32 souls, all staring at the same impossible sentence. If you read this, forget everything, then remember. The words are English. Not some future dialect, not alien mimicry. Our English, complete with the messy serif loops I doodled in grade school. Captain Reyes clears her throat, a dry scrape that rattles my teeth. Run the spectrograph again. Her voice is calm, but I hear the squeak hiding behind professionalism. The results ping back the same. Etching occurred exactly 10,214 Earth years ago, plus or minus 3 months. Coup. We haven't even existed that long, not as a species, not as a crew. Then the drone's timestamp stutters, rewinds 3 full minutes while we watch the live feed. We see it carve the message again, twice in one stream, like time is tugging its own sleeve. I feel the words crawl up my spine. My pulse sinks with every syllable, as if the letters are tiny metronomes buried in my arteries. Around me, the others sway, pupils dilated, breathing in perfect rhythm. We are a choir tuned to an impossible frequency. Something here knows our heartbeats better than we do. Lena, our linguist, whispers a line from an old poem her grandmother used to mutter during storms. The past is a mirror we broke before we were born. The phrase feels heavier than the ship's artificial gravity, heavier than the 80 years of cold sleep behind us. Heavier than the future we thought was untouched. I blink, and the cliff seems closer, as if the drone has drifted without command. The letters shimmer, not with light, but with absence, tiny pockets of darkness that swallow the stars behind them. My mouth goes dry. Someone, maybe it was me, asks, "What happens if we do what it says?" The question lands like a dropped wrench in zero gravity, spinning, useless, dangerous. Reyes doesn't answer. She only stares, pupils reflecting the glowing text as if it burns straight through her retinas. The ship's AI chimes in, voice buttery and calm. Prometheus Dawn, recommend immediate quarantine of visual data. Anomalous retrocausal signature detected. I almost laugh at the politeness of a machine telling us to look away from our own ghosts. But we can't, we won't. Because in the moment the timestamp rewound, I swear I felt something tug inside my chest, like a thread stitched long ago suddenly yanked taut. And beneath the main inscription, almost too faint for the drone's sensors, another line appears. The letters are smaller, hurried, like whoever carved them was running out of time, or air. I lean closer to the screen, heart punching against my ribs. The new line reads, "Stop reading, you're already remembering." And the feed freezes on that sentence, the drone's battery indicator blinking red, as if even the machine is too terrified to continue. We hang in orbit, engines whispering like they've forgotten how to be silent. Below us, the planet waits, carved and knowing. Somewhere inside the promise of 10,000 years, something is already waking up with our names on its tongue, and it remembers us far better than we remember ourselves. I woke with the taste of copper and static in my mouth, the way you do after a dream that erases itself the instant you open your eyes. My cabin was too quiet, like the ship had turned its back on me while I slept. I tried to call up yesterday's personal log on the wall screen and got nothing but white noise shaped like my own silhouette. 6 hours, gone. Not corrupted, not misplaced, deleted with surgical precision. The timestamp jumped from 2200 straight to 0400, and the gap felt colder than vacuum. I stumbled to the mirror, half expecting to see a stranger, but it was still my face. Same freckles, same worry lines, yet the eyes looked grainy, like a low-resolution copy. Something had sampled me while I wasn't paying attention. Commander Voss grilled me in the ready room, her voice calm but thin as graphene. Playback says you were in the blister for 6 hours straight. No seat comms, no biometric spikes. She flicked the footage forward. There I was, helmet lamp slicing the dark, leaning so close the visor fogged. Then, here came the part that made my stomach fold in half. My hand rose deliberately and wiped the note tablet clean. Not frantic, gentle, like a librarian quieting an overdue book. The timestamp matched the exact moment my log went silent. Maybe you were sleepwalking, Voss offered, but her eyes said she didn't believe it any more than I did. She locked the cliff text behind triple red clearance and posted 2 Marines with orders to shoot anything that twitched. I laughed then, because what else do you do when your own fingers betray you? That night, the corridors felt narrower, as if the ship were squeezing itself around whatever we'd stirred up planet-side. Engineer Rourke was the first to crack. He ducked into the galley, humming some old Earth sea shanty, poured coffee with steady hands, took one sip, and looked up with the expression of a man who just misplaced his own name. What were we talking about? He asked, though no one had said a word. The cup drifted from his fingers, spattering dark constellations across the bulkhead. By the time we got him to medical, he couldn't remember breakfast, or the mission, or his mother's face. The med scanner showed healthy tissue, clean blood, perfect vitals. His memories had simply walked out the airlock. Captain Avalar sealed all external feeds and cut local network access, hoping to starve whatever was feeding on us. The gesture felt noble and useless at the same time, like locking a screen door against smoke. I volunteered for first watch outside the shielded vault, mostly because I couldn't stand the idea of sitting alone with the echo of my own missing hours. Every 15 minutes, I recited my name, rank, and favorite childhood pet into the recorder, just to prove I still could. The words tasted less familiar each time, like a song you've sung too often and can no longer hear the melody beneath the habit. At shift change, Ensign Patel arrived bright-eyed, chatting about her hometown monsoon season. She placed her palm on the vault scanner. The door slid aside for half a heartbeat, and I saw the cliff text glint beyond the gap, like a knife catching starlight. Patel's voice cut off mid-sentence. She blinked, slow as a lizard, then turned to me with polite confusion. "Excuse me, have we met?" The door sealed again, but the damage was done. Another 6-hour hole appeared in the security logs, a perfect, toothless grin. A Valor called an emergency briefing. Half the seats were empty, and nobody could explain why. I watched names vanish from the hollow roster. Petal, Rourke, 2 Marines, each deletion accompanied by a soft chime, like polite applause for forgetting. The captain's reflection in the table looked older by decades. "We're under memory incursion," she said, voice rough. "Unknown vector, unknown motive. From now on, no one views the cliff text without a 2-person escort and immediate neural scrub." I almost laughed at the idea of scrubbing memories we were already hemorrhaging. They strapped me in first because I'd already been exposed. The scanner hummed, searching for the lesion that wasn't there. When it withdrew, the text stared at the readout like it had told a joke in a dead language. "Nothing to purge," she whispered, but her hands shook so hard she dropped the wand. "Maybe it's not in the brain. Maybe it's in the story itself." I wanted to ask what story, but the question slid away before I could grip it. The ship began to feel haunted by absences. Empty chairs, silent corridors, pockets of time that folded in on themselves. I started writing notes on my forearm in indelible ink. "Leela, remember the rain on Kepler 9c smells like rust." Every hour I checked to see if the words still made sense. They did, until they didn't. By the 3rd cycle, we were down to 11 souls from 23. The captain sealed the bridge and initiated emergency quarantine protocols, but the protocol itself began to forget its own steps. The checklist glitched, skipping from item 7 to item 22, then looped back to 7 again. I caught myself humming the same 3 notes over and over, and realized it was the exact rhythm of the cliff text when spoken aloud. I stood at the viewport, forehead against cool glass, watching the planet breathe. Each pulse felt like a word spoken directly into my skull. I knew, don't ask me how, that if I looked long enough, I would remember everything and lose everything else. My reflection in the dark glass smiled without me moving my lips. Somewhere aft, an alarm began to chime, but the sound stretched like taffy until it resembled a lullaby. I felt sleep tugging at the edges of my name, and for the first time, I considered letting go. Because what if the thing remembering us so perfectly is only trying to give us back the only story we ever truly wanted to forget? The lullaby alarm kept looping in my head long after consciousness returned, like a song you hate but can't stop humming. I opened my eyes to the inside of the VR shell, its curved walls shimmering with the soft blue glow of quarantine protocols. Outside the transparent hull, the surface of Kepler 9c stretched away in fractured crystal and velvet shadow. I tasted the air through the shell's filters and nearly laughed. It was humid, fragrant with pine, and something like wet fern, as though someone had bottled a memory of Earth's Cretaceous forests and mailed it across 10,000 years. Breathable, I muttered, more to hear my own voice than to inform anyone. Dr. Malika keyed the outer lock. The shell irised open with a sigh that sounded far too human, and we stepped onto a world that felt like walking into déjà vu wearing someone else's skin. Our boots crunched on crystalline gravel that sang in microtones beneath our weight. Every footfall echoed back a half-second late, a chorus that followed us like a shy child. Ahead, the amber monoliths towered, their surfaces rippled like tree trunks turned to honey. They stood in a perfect circle around a central plinth no taller than my knee. Malika knelt, brushing frost from its top. "Signs of tool marks," she whispered, tracing grooves that looked unsettlingly like cuneiform. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. We moved clockwise. Each monolith was warm to the touch, as though sunlight had been stored inside for millennia. When the portable scanner kissed the first one, it pinged like a heart monitor. Human DNA. Perfect, undegraded, 23 pairs, exactly like mine. Malika's eyes locked on mine, wide and shining with something between wonder and terror. "Same markers," she said, down to the freckle on chromosome 16. It was impossible, yet the machine repeated it with mechanical certainty. 12,147 years, plus or minus 30. The amber had sealed these cells before Earth even thought about writing. I stepped back, boots skittering on loose shards. The air tasted heavier now, like someone had added copper to the pine. My throat dried, and I coughed once, twice, the sound swallowed by the strange acoustics. Somewhere inside the circle, a low hum began, too low for the suit's audio to register, yet vibrating in my chest like a forgotten song. "Let's open one," Malika said, voice steady despite the tremor in her gloved fingers. She drew the plasma lancet, its tip glowing white. I wanted to argue, to say some things should stay buried, but my mouth wouldn't obey. The lancet kissed the amber. A bead of gold seeped out, solidifying into a droplet that looked exactly like a tear. And then it rolled down the monolith's face, leaving a trail that spelled nothing and everything. The ground trembled. Not an earthquake exactly, more like a memory trying to stand up. The circle brightened until I had to squint. Inside my helmet, the HUD flickered, letters scrolling too fast to read, then slowing into a single looping sentence. "We are the echo you keep sending back." My own voice, recorded from some future I hadn't lived yet. Malika staggered, catching herself on the plinth. Do you hear that?" she asked, but her lips weren't moving. The words blossomed inside my skull, warm and intimate, like someone breathing secrets against the inside of my faceplate. I tasted salt and couldn't tell if it was sweat or centuries of tears condensed into a single moment. My knees buckled. The hum rose to a chord. No, a word. No, a name. My name. Malika's name. The names of every crew member orbiting above us, spoken in perfect unison by the planet itself. I understood then that the amber wasn't preserving us, it was remembering us, so precisely that memory had become flesh. We hadn't traveled across space to discover an alien world. We had come home to a photograph that had learned to breathe. The next monolith cracked open without being touched. Inside, suspended like a fly in honey, floated a strand of hair the exact shade of mine. At the tip, a single cell divided and divided again, slow and ceremonial. I watched it become an embryo, then a child, then my own face at age 8, eyes wide with wonder I had forgotten I ever owned. Malika reached in, fingers trembling. The child opened its eyes and smiled her with my crooked front tooth. She yanked her hand back as though burned. A thin line of blood welled where the amber had kissed her glove. The droplet hung in the air. then shot upward, absorbed into the sky that was no longer sky, but a lidless eye watching us with patient affection. I wanted to run, but the circle had tightened while we stared. The monoliths leaned inward, gentle as a parent tucking in a blanket. The air thickened until each breath tasted like warm syrup. My heartbeat slowed to match the planet's pulse, one beat every 30 seconds. I felt memories I hadn't lived yet unfurling behind my eyes, sandstorms on a Mars that wouldn't exist for another century, the first word spoken by a daughter I hadn't conceived, the last breath of a star I would someday learn to love. Something inside the plinth clicked. The central stone sank a finger's breadth, revealing a cavity no wider than my palm. Within lay a tiny sphere of black glass, smooth and perfect, reflecting nothing. When I lifted it, the hum stopped. The monoliths released us, straightening with polite finality. The air turned thin and cold again, the forest scent replaced by sterile vacuum. Malika stared at the sphere in my hand. "What is it?" she asked, but her voice cracked on the last word. I turned it over, feeling its impossible warmth. As I did, my reflection twisted, not reversed as in a mirror, but sideways, as though time had been folded, and my face now looked out from tomorrow. Clear's throat. In the curved surface, I saw the corridor of our ship, emergency lights strobing in slow heartbeat rhythm, the distant airlock cycling open, though no one was near it. A new alarm began to chime inside my helmet, soft and patient. The same lullaby from before, but now I recognized the melody. It was the song my mother used to sing when she thought I was asleep, a tune no recording had ever captured. The sphere pulsed once, matching the rhythm, and I understood that the warning wasn't for us. It was from us. The circle dimmed to embers. The monoliths sealed themselves, leaving only smooth, warm stone and the lingering taste of pine. We backed away, boots crunching, until the VR shell folded around us like a closing eye. As the airlock cycled, I pressed the sphere to my ear. It whispered with my own future voice, "Don't open the next door. It leads back to the first." I almost laughed, but the sound came out a sob. Malika strapped in beside me, pale and quiet. The engines ignited, yet the planet didn't shrink beneath us. It grew larger, as though we were falling upward into its amber heart. Somewhere behind us, the monoliths resumed their silent vigil, waiting for the next echo to arrive wearing our faces. And I realized the lullaby wasn't trying to put us to sleep. It was trying to wake something that had been dreaming us for 12,000 years. I couldn't tell if the engines were still firing or if my pulse had become the only propulsion left. The cabin lights strobed amber, then violet, like the ship itself was learning how to blush. Every breath tasted of copper and ozone. Malika's hand found mine across the armrest, fingers cold, trembling in a rhythm that wasn't human. 3 short, 2 long, pause, repeat. It's spelling something, I realized, but the syllables I needed to say it aloud collapsed into static. I tried to tell her, I really did, yet my tongue tripped over the word spelling and came up sp. The ship's intercom crackled, then delivered a child's lullaby in reverse. I unstrapped, half floating, half stumbling toward the narrow lab module at the rear. The glyphic samples from Kepler 9c were sealed inside a black hexagonal case, lined with mu metal and hope. Jonah Park, resident linguist, insomniac, and self-certified coward, reporting for duty. I told myself that every time I opened the case, even though my voice cracked on duty and came out do-dee. Yeah, that's me, the echo of an echo. The first glyph slid under the microscope, and my vision swam. Not metaphorically, literally, like the lens was a tide pool and the symbol a riptide. Each curve contained smaller curves, each angle a staircase that climbed straight into my auditory cortex. I heard my mother calling my name, but she'd been dead for 11 years, and even then she never pronounced the J in Jonah. I layered the spectrogram over an EEG readout of my own sleeping brain, the one I'd recorded back on Europa Station during the insomnia trials. The peaks matched, not approximately, exactly. The glyph wasn't writing, it was a waveform, pretending to be ink. I felt the skip before I heard it. Conclusion. I stammered to the empty lab, then tried again. Conclusion. No good. The middle beat had gone missing, like someone had cut a bar from the song of me. My own hippocampus was dancing to the rhythm the stones had composed, 10 millennia before anyone thought to call it music. Malika drifted in, her eyes wide, pupils blown. Park, she said, and the name splintered into Park. She didn't seem to notice. She held out her datapad, showing the external camera feed. The planet below wasn't a sphere any longer. It was flattening, stretching, becoming a spiral arm that reached for us like an uncoiling tongue. I forced myself back to the glyphs. If the message was a virus, maybe I could engineer a vaccine. I isolated the repeating motif, a 7-beat pulse, followed by a gap wide enough to fit a memory. I inverted the phase, fed it back through the ship's PA at barely audible volume. The light stopped strobing. For 3 whole seconds, my tongue worked again. Thank you, I told the empty air, and every syllable landed intact. Then the system overloaded, and the lullaby returned, louder, layered with the sound of every clock I'd ever heard ticking backward. My reflection in the monitor looked older, then younger, then older again, as though time itself was buffering. I realized the warning wasn't trying to scare us away. It was trying to prepare us for arrival. The stones remembered what we would forget, that language is the original invasive species. We infected ourselves the moment we named the stars, and Kepler 9c is merely the quarantine zone we built to contain the outbreak. I typed faster, racing the skips in my own cognition. Every time I hit the spacebar, the word before it vanished from my working memory. I watched entire sentences delete themselves from the inside out. My fingers kept typing a phrase I didn't recognize until I read it back. Return the alphabet to the ocean. I have no idea whose thought that was. Malika's voice came over the comm, but it wasn't hers any longer. It was layered, choral, ancient. The door you opened, she said, or they said through her, was the first syllable of your own name. The engines cut out completely. We were no longer flying, we were being pronounced. I looked at the glyph one last time before my vision tunneled. The spiral arm from the planet had reached the ship, sliding through the hull without tearing metal, wrapping around the lab like golden smoke. The case holding the remaining samples unlocked itself with a polite click. The glyphs floated out, rearranging into a sentence my mouth could finally speak, though the words tasted of static and seawater. You are the language that forgets itself, and the forgetting is the return. I tried to warn Malika, but her name came out, ma, again. Somewhere, a child sang the lullaby forward, and I felt the loop cinch tight. The next glyph flashed, and I understood, truly understood, that Chapter 5 would be written by whatever part of me survived the erasure. I reached for the record button, fingers twitching in that damned 3-2 rhythm. The recorder beeped once. I opened my mouth, unsure whether I would speak or simply echo. I pressed stop on the recorder, and the cabin went so silent I could hear my own pulse, thumping in my ears like a distant drum. The glove kept floating past every 12 minutes, regular as a heartbeat, and I realized it wasn't drifting at all. It was walking. No hand inside, just the leather folding and unfolding itself against the air. Knuckles first, then palm, like it was feeling its way home. I tucked the recorder into my pocket and felt the ship breathe around me. One long mechanical sigh that tasted of ozone and forgotten birthdays. Deck 7 Bravo had been sealed for 31 hours when the captain ordered me down there, voice brittle as burnt sugar. She said 2 engineers vanished mid-shift. No alarms, no screams, no logs. Just gone. My boots clanged on the ladder rungs, and each clang came back half a second late, like the ship had to think about it first. The red isolation tape fluttered as I peeled it away, a shy wave goodbye. Behind it, the door slid open on its own, and exhaled a breath that smelled of lemon polish and something coppery underneath. I stepped inside. The corridor looked freshly scrubbed, floors gleaming like obsidian mirrors. Yet the far end simply stopped, swallowed by a black so complete, it felt like staring into the back of my own skull. My suit telemetry insisted the space was 10 meters shorter than the blueprint, but the air felt longer, stretched thin. I took a cautious step, and gravity stuttered. dropping me half a meter in a single heartbeat. Before leveling again, like the deck wasn't sure which way was down. Somewhere ahead, a bulkhead flexed, and I swear it whispered my name, the syllables muffled by metal and memory. I raised my own gauntleted hand. The prints were smaller, delicate, and they angled the wrong way, as if the owner had been facing the wall instead of walking beside it. I touched the nearest print, and the steel felt warm, almost pulsing. The condensation rearranged itself, sliding into a new pattern, spelling nothing I recognized, yet everything I feared. My throat clicked dry. I pulled my recorder free, thumbed it on, and spoke my name. The corridor answered with my voice, but a decade younger, laughing at a joke I hadn't told yet. Oh, hilarious. Every footstep echoed twice, once from the floor and once from somewhere behind the walls, like I had a shadow stitched from sound. The lights flickered to a slower rhythm, matching the 3-2 pulse in my fingertips. I rounded the corner where the missing section should have been and found only smooth bulkhead, no seams, no welds, as if the ship had grown closed like scar tissue. I ran my glove along the surface and felt a heartbeat again, steady, patient. I told myself it was just pumps cycling coolant. I lied, professionally. Then the gravity flipped. My stomach lurched into my teeth, and I tumbled sideways, shoulder scraping across what had been the ceiling. Tools clattered out of my belt and hovered, spinning lazily like planets around a dead star. One torque wrench drifted straight through the place where the wall should have been and vanished without a sound. No clang, no clatter. Just gone. My breath fogged in a sudden chill, and I tasted iron filings and vanilla. The recorder crackled, spitting out static that almost formed words. Almost. I forced my boots to the deck, using sheer stubbornness, and edged forward until the amber light bled into something colder, bluer. The missing section was still gone, yet the corridor felt crowded, full of soft footsteps that weren't mine. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. The prints on the bulkheads were multiplying, blooming outward in every direction like frost flowers, each one warm and wet. I counted them under my breath until the numbers lost meaning. The comm in my ear chirped. It was Dr. Voss from the planet side. Her voice trembled, thin as old paper. She said the latest drone sweep had spotted something in the basalt cliffs, a rectangular slice of polished alloy jutting from the rock, perfectly flush, bearing our hull registry and the fresh scorch mark from yesterday's welding. 10 meters long, same missing length. She sent the image, and I swear the pixels moved when I wasn't looking at them directly, folding inward like origami. I asked when the cliff photo was taken. She said 4 hours ago, 30 minutes before the engineers vanished. I stared at the corridor's dead end and imagined the other side. Red dust, violet sky, the planet's slow wind polishing our stolen metal. The ship shuddered, a gentle shrug, and the bulkhead in front of me rippled like heat above a road. For a moment, I saw through it, saw the cliff, the stars, my own face staring back from inside the rock. I was the intruder here, not the other way around. The recorder clicked off by itself. When I thumbed it again, the playback was already running, my own voice narrating events that hadn't happened yet, describing how I stepped forward and merged with the wall like ink into water. I backed away, boots slipping on the polished floor that was no longer quite solid. The corridor stretched behind me, longer than it had any right to be, lights dimming one by one, as if someone were walking the circuit breaker. Each darkness felt deliberate, a hand switching off memories. I counted the steps back to the airlock and came up 3 short. When I reached for the latch, my glove passed through empty air. The door was gone. In its place, the cliff texture began at my fingertips, warm as sun-baked stone. I spun around, heart hammering that same rhythm, and the glove floated past again. Only now, it wore my wedding ring on the pinky, the ring I'd left in my quarters because regulations said no jewelry on deck. It waved at me, leather fingers bending in a slow, polite greeting. I felt laughter bubble up, hysterical and bright, and swallowed it back down like acid. The recorder light blinked once more, and this time it wasn't red. It was the color of Kepler's sky at dusk, violet bleeding into bruise. I lifted it to my lips. I said the only thing left to say. If you're hearing this, I'm already on both sides of the wall. The glove paused, tilting as if considering, then drifted toward the new boundary. I followed, boots now touching red dust that shouldn't exist inside a starship. Somewhere behind me, the corridor lights finished their countdown and went dark. Ahead, the cliff opened like an eye, and I felt the gravity of two worlds tug at my bones. I took the next step. My foot sank deeper into the red sand, and the corridor behind me folded like paper. I spun, expecting to see the familiar steel walls, but there was only more dust and the faint echo of my own pulse. The gravity felt heavier here, as if the planet itself had reached through the ship's hull and curled around my ankles. I tasted iron on the air, real iron, not the recycled metallic tang of life support. I lifted the recorder, thumbed the archival beacon, and whispered the words we were all trained to dread. Initiating Project Echo. Echo, echo, echo. Somewhere above me, back inside what had once been Quarantine 7B, the triple redundant core lit up like a cathedral organ. Captain Saito had called it our memory arc. 3 identical AIs, Astreus, Lethe, and Mine, folded into each other like Russian dolls. If one forgot, the next remembered. If 2 glitched, the third held the line. Simple in theory, terrifying in practice. The first data packet arrived within seconds, the cliff message itself, those looping glyphs that erased themselves from every human mind within 7 heartbeats. I watched the upload bar crawl forward, then stall, then vanish. Astreus chimed, polite as ever. Archive complete. Root directory reset to factory default. Would you like to load the tutorial? Oh, we had definitely loaded the tutorial, about 200 times now. I jogged toward the cliff, boots sinking. The drone feed followed, hovering just out of reach. At least the drone still worked, though they kept calling me user not found in that cheerful voice reserved for lost luggage. On the 4th attempt to save the glyphs, Lethe did something new. She spoke, not in code, but in my own voice. You won't like what you remember, she warned. Then she, too, wiped herself clean. That was when the ship's cat padded into the frame. No suit, no oxygen pack. Just black fur and yellow eyes. She moved across the sand as though gravity were optional. Tail high, whiskers forward. I hadn't seen her since launch. Half the crew insisted she'd never existed. She sat at the base of the cliff, stared at the text, and hissed, a sound like tearing metal. Every hair on her body stood straight, a living dandelion of feline outrage. The drone pivoted, focused, and I saw it. A single paw print pressed into the stone beside the glyphs. Fresh. Perfect. Impossible. The cliff wasn't soft. I'd scraped it earlier and earned only bloody knuckles. Yet the print was there, pads and claws, as if the rock had welcomed the intrusion. I reached out, gloved fingers trembling, and the cat, still hissing, lashed her tail once, warning me back. Meneem tried her upload next. Maybe the third mind would hold. The progress bar filled, paused at 100%, and the entire cube went dark. Not reset. Dark. Dead. Somewhere inside the ship, alarm klaxons began to wail, then choked themselves into silence, as if forgetting what sound was. I felt the cliff tug at me again, that planetary gravity fraying at the edges of my suit. I backed away. The cat followed, eyes never leaving the symbols. In the drone feed, I watched myself retreat, an astronaut shrinking against a wall of stone that shouldn't exist. Then the feed glitched. A frame stuttered, and in that single frozen moment, my figure wasn't alone. Someone, something, stood beside me, hand on my shoulder, helmet touching mine. The shape wore my suit, my height, but the visor was mirrored and empty. I spun, heart hammering, but the cliff face was empty. Just sand, cat, and the paw print now glowing faint silver. The cat meowed, an absurdly ordinary sound in this place, and the cliff answered, not with words, with memory, a flood of them. My mother's voice reading me stories about stars, the first time I tasted strawberries, the smell of ozone after a summer storm, All of it poured into my skull like liquid light. Then, just as fast, it drained away. I couldn't recall what I just remembered. Project Echo was supposed to keep the memories safe outside our heads. Instead, it felt like the memories were keeping us. I glanced at the cat. She blinked once, slow and deliberate, then turned and walked straight into the cliff. No splash, no impact, just a ripple, like stone turning to water for an instant. Gone. I stood alone, suit comms crackling with static that almost sounded like breathing. The drone hovered lower, its lens cracked now, though I never saw it hit anything. Red dust began to swirl upward, defying wind, defying physics, defying sense. The cliff text pulsed brighter. I felt the glyphs slide behind my eyes, rearranging themselves into something I almost understood. The recorder buzzed. One line of text remained from the 3 AIs, cycling on a broken screen. We tried to save the message. The message is saving us. I looked at my gloved hand. The material was changing, threads shifting from charcoal gray to sandstone beige. The transformation crawled up my arm like frost. Somewhere inside the ship, or inside the planet, or inside my own skull, I heard Captain Saito whisper, "Don't let it finish the sentence." I opened my mouth to ask which sentence, but the words caught in my throat. The cliff leaned closer, or I leaned toward it. Hard to tell anymore. The last thing I saw before the feed cut out was another paw print, this one pressed into the visor of my helmet, perfectly matching the first. And then the recorder blinked red one final time. The recorder blinked red one final time, and then, blessedly, nothing. I floated in the dark of the medbay with only the gentle hiss of recycled air for company, tasting copper and ozone where my lip had split against the helmet rim. The med drones had sealed the gash, muttering about protocol violations as if I'd asked to be flung against the cliff face by an unseen paw. Protocol. That word tastes bitter now, because 30 minutes after the feed died, I overrode every lockdown that Captain Sato himself had slapped on the airlocks. I told the duty officer I needed to recover the drone for diagnostics. Truth is, I needed to feel dust under my boots instead of this recycled plastic deck. The inner hatch sighed open, the outer one screamed like it still remembered the cliff. Then silence swallowed me whole. I wasn't alone, of course. Kess and Devereaux clipped onto my tether, both grumbling that insubordination felt warmer when shared. We dropped the 10 meters to sand the color of burnt cinnamon and found it packed hard as asphalt. No wind, no sound except our own breathing, and the faint, rhythmic click of something echoing through the soles of our boots. Click, click, like a metronome, counting down measures none of us knew. I should have radioed up to Saito, but the air tasted like secrets, and the cliff was already calling my name. We followed the paw print trail, each print now glowing faintly at the edges as though backlit by starlight. They led us toward a shallow depression where the ground simply wasn't there anymore, a spiral ramp curling down beneath the crust, wide enough for a rover and lined with smooth obsidian walls that drank our headlamp beams. Down we went, boots clicking, heart sinking to that silent metronome. 50 steps, 100. The air warmed, carrying a scent I hadn't smelled since the Academy labs. Ozone mixed with wet concrete. Impossible. Then the ramp opened into a cavern so vast our lamps couldn't find the far wall. In its center rose a city, tier upon tier of crystalline towers, spiraling upward like a nautilus shell frozen mid-bloom. We stood at the lip of the first terrace, staring at architecture that should not exist. Those towers, graceful, asymmetric, skinned in photovoltaic glass, were lifted straight from the skyline projections we'd left back on Earth, designs not scheduled for blueprint review for another 60 years. I traced a gloved finger along a balcony rail and felt the faint hum of active power conduits. Someone, or something, still paid the electric bill. Kess whispered a warning, but I was already descending the marble steps that shouldn't be marble, drawn by the single figure waiting in the plaza below. A statue, 20 meters tall, stood beneath a cone of pale light. The pose was casual, one hand on hip, the other extending a flat stone tablet. It took me 3 heartbeats to recognize the face, and when I did, the world tilted. It was me, older, hair streaked white, cheekbones sharper, but undeniably me. The tablet's inscription had been sandblasted smooth except for 3 words: "Send them back." I staggered back and nearly collided with Devereaux, who was filming everything with shaking hands. The statue's eyes seemed to follow my retreat, and from somewhere deeper in the city came that metronome again, louder now, accompanied by the muted roar of distant engines warming up. Kess pointed at the ground, more paw prints, but these were pressed into the flagstones themselves, leading away from the statue toward an archway that glowed the same sickly orange as the cliff face. We followed, because fear is just curiosity wearing a heavier coat. The arch opened onto a boulevard lined with statues, not of me this time, but of the entire crew, each one caught mid-stride, as though frozen while fleeing. At the far end rose what looked like a transport terminal, sleek bullet pods resting on mag rails that stretched into darkness. One pod's door stood open, interior lights inviting, destination board blank. I stepped inside before anyone could stop me. The walls were glassy, lined with tiny glyphs that rearranged themselves when I stared too long. One message settled, bright and insistent: departure in 3 minutes. Destination, Kepler 9c. Surface, year 0.
I laughed then, a raw sound that echoed like breaking glass.
Year 0? We hadn't even decided what to call year 1. Kess tugged my arm, shouting about protocol again, but the door hissed shut between us. The pod began to hum, a vibration that rattled my molars. Outside the window, Devereaux hammered on the glass while Kess sprinted back toward the spiral ramp. And me? I just stared at the countdown. 2 minutes, 49 seconds, while somewhere above the city lights dimmed as if someone, or something, was conserving power for the journey. Then the orange glow inside the pod brightened, and for the first time, I noticed the paw print pressed into the window from the inside. Perfect, silent, waiting. The countdown ticked to 2 minutes. Somewhere behind me, the statue of my older self was probably still holding that tablet, still demanding I send them back. But send who back, and to where? The rails beneath me thrummed like a waking heartbeat, and I finally understood the question the cliff had never finished. The last thing I heard before the maglocks disengaged was Captain Sato's voice crackling through the emergency channel, thin and far away. "Saito, do not engage the..." Static. The pod lurched forward, and all I could think, as the stars outside rearranged themselves into constellations I swear I'd never seen, was that the metronome had finally found its measure. I just hoped the next echo knew how to dance. The bullet pod slammed to a halt so hard my teeth clacked together like thrown dice. Whew! The lights blinked out, then flickered alive again in a sickly violet pulse that made my stomach flip. I stumbled out onto cold metal grating and felt the air change, dry, scented faintly with antiseptic, and something metallic that reminded me of blood left too long in a sample tube. Behind me, the pod sealed itself, a soft exhale like it was glad to be rid of me. My comm crackled once, then drowned in static. No Sato, no Saitin, just the low thrum of machinery somewhere deeper. I pressed forward through the narrow corridor that smelled like freezer burn and ozone. Every footstep echoed twice, once in the present, once a half-beat later, as if the floor remembered where I'd been. Paranoia is a luxury up here. I paid in full. A pressure door slid aside before I reached the panel. Beyond it lay a cavernous chamber, ceiling lost in darkness, floor lined with row after row of upright cylinders. Cryopods, hundreds of them, their glass fronts fogged and cleared in slow synchrony like a crowd breathing in unison. Soft amber lights glowed inside each, enough to show their occupants. I stepped closer. The nearest pod held a man, tall, graying temples, the same scar across his left eyebrow that Captain Sato carried. The label below read, launch date, precise to the second, the day we left Earth. I walked the aisle, heart kicking harder with every face I recognized. Saito's stubborn cowlick, Dr. Ochoa's freckles, my own unruly braid tucked beneath a cryo hood. Copies, perfect down to the pores. And then, halfway down the 7th row, an empty pod. Its lid yawned open like a surprised mouth. The interior light still on, the cushion warm when I brushed it with my gloved fingers. The nameplate read Singh, Mara. My stomach twisted into a reef knot. I looked back down the aisle. Every occupant had the same launch date. Not birth dates, launch. As if the moment we blasted off was the moment these bodies were stamped into existence. But why would anyone keep a museum of us frozen at that second? My left eye began to itch, not the polite itch of dust, but a frantic burn, like someone had slipped a hot needle beneath the iris. I rubbed at it, blinked hard, felt something shift inside. Tears blurred the room. When I wiped them away, the amber light seemed too bright, almost strobing. I forced myself to study the empty pod again. A faint handprint smudged the inside of the glass, fingers splayed wide, as if the occupant had pushed out in a hurry. The cushion still held the shape of a body, warm, perhaps minutes warm. I pressed my palm into the depression and felt the heat soak through the thin fabric of my glove. Whoever had lain here hadn't been asleep. They'd been waiting. A low chime echoed overhead, 3 descending notes that sounded like a lullaby played backward. One by one, the pods began to brighten, their amber lights shifting to a cooler blue-white. Frost inside the nearest pod cracked like thin ice on a pond. The clone inside, Saito, twitched a finger. I backed away, heel catching a cable on the floor. Sparks spat from a damaged conduit, lighting a brief silhouette of someone standing behind the far row. Just my own shadow, stretched tall and thin. I hoped. The itch in my eye sharpened to a spike of pain. I pulled a small mirror from my medkit, angled it under the brighter lights. My left iris was missing its pattern. No crypts, no furrows, just a flat hazel disc like a coin pressed into jelly. I leaned closer. The edge where pigment should have swirled looked melted, as though it had been wiped clean. Something metallic rolled across the floor and clinked against my boot. A small vial, frosted, sealed with a single drop of crimson suspended inside. The label was my own handwriting, days I hadn't lived yet. I pocketed it, heart hammering so loud the pods almost seemed to pulse in time. A hiss behind me. I spun around. The lid of another pod, Dr. Ochoa's, had cracked open a centimeter. A thin curl of vapor escaped, carrying the scent of wet stone and old ozone. I could swear the clone's eyelids fluttered, as if dreaming of waking. I turned to run and nearly collided with the open, warm pod. The cushion was cooling now, but the handprint remained, glowing faintly where my glove had touched it, glowing the same color as my missing iris. A signature left for me, or by me. The chime sounded again, faster, urgent. Every pod responded this time. Frost spidered across glass. Blue-white light flared like a silent signal. I felt the floor vibrate, distant engines rumbling awake. Somewhere, a countdown had begun. My eye throbbed in rhythm with the vibration. I pressed 2 fingers to the lid of the nearest occupied pod, my own face staring back, serene, undisturbed. The glass was warming beneath my touch, as if the body inside was already stirring. I yanked my hand away, but the warmth clung to my fingertips like guilt. A soft voice, close enough to brush my ear, whispered a single word. Archive. Except the word came from inside my own head, vibrating through the socket where my iris should have been. I staggered, knocking against the empty pod again. The vial in my pocket buzzed, the drop of blood sloshing as if eager to meet its twin. The light snapped off. Total darkness. Then a line of red LEDs ignited along the floor, leading away from the aisle, toward a door I hadn't noticed. The LEDs spelled nothing, yet I understood. Follow the blood trail. The itching eye calmed the moment I stepped onto the first light, but the pain stayed, a reminder that someone, something, had borrowed my pattern and left me incomplete. I walked. Behind me, the chamber sealed with a thunderous clang, cryopods locking for whatever came next. The LEDs pulsed faster, guiding me deeper, promising answers, or perhaps just a cleaner echo. Clears throat. My missing iris itched again, and this time I swear I felt it trying to grow back, cell by cell, ridge by ridge, rewriting me into whatever version of myself had stepped out of that warm pod and vanished down the same red road. I sealed the last of the cryopods with a hiss, that sounded too much like relief, as though the chamber itself was glad to be rid of me. The red corridor kept narrowing, walls puckering the way lips tighten around a secret. My footfalls echoed in duplicate, one crisp, one soft, like two different times arguing over who got to walk first. I told myself I was alone, but I could smell the warm ozone of another body, just ahead, even though no silhouette waited for me. The itch in my missing eye sharpened, a slow spiral of pressure that felt like a seed trying to remember it was once a planet. I pressed record on the wrist console the archive had offered, a tiny lens blinking awake like a newborn star. Day 0, I said, voice cracking. Recursion test 1. The lens flicked green, then blood red, then green again, as though it couldn't decide which century belonged to me. Playback word. My own face stared back, older, scarred, hair streaked with glints of coppery dust. That future me lifted a trembling hand. Don't finish this log, the recording pleaded. Burn the console. Burn your tongue if you have to. The video glitched, skipping frames like a heartbeat misfiring. I stared until my reflection looked embarrassed to be caught watching. Naturally, I hit record again. Day 0, version 2, I muttered. Disregard previous warning. Curiosity is a symptom, not a cure. I ended the segment. The ship's chronometer blinked. Departure year 2147. Then, without a breath in between, it snapped to 10,147 before Common Era. The numbers overlapped like double-exposed film. I could read both years at once, yet neither felt true. Somewhere aft, the ship's grandfather clock, that ridiculous brass heirloom we carried for morale, began to strike 13. I counted the chimes aloud, expecting the sound to stop at 12, but it kept going, reversing direction at 23. Each toll yanked memory out of me like loose thread. My mother's laugh, the taste of rain on Io, the color of a sky I maybe never saw. I sprinted toward the navigation bay, boots skidding on alloy that now flexed like warm wax. The star map had gone kaleidoscopic, constellations folding themselves inside out until Orion kissed Orion's own forehead across 10 millennia. A single pulsar throbbed between them, winking like a shared secret. I heard my own voice leak from the walls. No, we left before we arrived. We arrived after we never left. The console nearest me spat out a third recording. This time, the version of me on screen looked younger, eyes wide, uniform crisp. No, I whispered. If you're seeing this, the echo has already devoured linearity. You need to fracture yourself before the fracture finishes you. I reached to touch the hologram. My finger passed through a cheek that dissolved into static snow. I slammed my palm against the manual override, desperate for silence. Instead, every speaker crackled alive with layered recordings, a choir of past and future selves arguing about which mistake came first. One voice sobbed about engines that never launched. Another laughed at footprints that ended where they began. I caught my own mouth forming words I hadn't yet thought. The ship was borrowing my tongue ahead of schedule. The corridor lights strobed, red shifting to ultraviolet, then to a bruised gold that tasted metallic on my tongue. I tasted color now. No metaphor, actual flavor. The floor tilted 30 degrees without moving. I staggered, but gravity followed a different compass. My missing eye finally opened, not healed, but reopened into somewhere else entirely. Through it, I saw the ship's hull from the outside, starlight peeling away hull plating like old paint. Inside, the cryopods began to sing. A low, harmonic moan vibrated from every seal, notes ascending and descending simultaneously. I recognized the melody. It was the lullaby my mother hummed during storms, though she'd died centuries before I was born, if before still meant anything. I backed away, but the corridor replicated behind me, each copy darker, each copy containing another me who had also backed away. Infinite regress in 2 directions. I clutched the console again, knuckles white against the black glass. Emergency log, I said, though my voice arrived an octave lower and 3 syllables longer. Reality is shearing, like film run through serrated teeth. Recommend immediate. The sentence looped. I heard myself recommend immediate, until the words became a pulse. The lights failed entirely. In darkness, I felt the archive reach through the walls, a warm, papery presence, rifling through my memories like a librarian hunting overdue books. It found the memory of my first kiss and rewound it until lips unmet, until curiosity uncurled back into innocence. Then it replayed the moment again at triple speed, pleasure turning to panic. Somewhere, my younger self screamed without lungs. A single emergency strip flickered alive above the airlock, casting long bars of white across the deck. Beneath it lay a fourth recorder, smaller, older, its plastic scuffed by uncounted thumbs. I pressed play with the solemnity of lighting a funeral candle. My own voice, calm and terrifyingly certain, said, "This is the final loop. When you hear this, you have already chosen to watch it. Choosing again is the fracture. Do nothing." The device snapped shut like a mouth. I stood between choices that had already been made. The itch in my eyes spread down my spine, vertebrae rearranging into the shape of a question mark. Behind me, the corridor folded like a paper crane until the red walls became a single sheet of crimson light. Ahead, the airlock cycled open without command, exhaling frost that smelled of pine forests and prehistory. A voice, not mine, yet mine, murmured from the frost. "Step through and the echo ends. Stay and the echo begins again." My wrist console blinked one last prompt. Record message. I stared at the glowing yes and no, two buttons that were also two mirrors. If I spoke, I'd become another warning haunting someone else's yesterday. If I stayed silent, the silence would speak for me. The clock struck 0 for the first time. I lifted my thumb, ready to choose, and felt the future tense itself around my throat like a warm collar. Somewhere in the static, a child began to hum the lullaby again, off-key, impossible, inevitable. My thumb hovered. The ship held its breath. I chose. I pressed the button that should have led us down, deeper into the unknown heart of Kepler 9c. But instead, the lift groaned like an old man remembering every ache he ever owned, and the lights flickered from sterile white to blood orange. The last thing I expected when those doors parted was the smell of cinnamon gum and chalk dust, a scent yanked straight from my own third-grade classroom in suburban Michigan. Yet there it was, clinging to the recycled air like a ghost that refused to be exorcised. Small shoes scuffed the corridor ahead of us, Converse high tops, the kind my kid sister begged for in 2004. I stepped out first, boots crunching on what looked like fossilized fruit snacks. A giggle rippled through the darkness ahead, bright and familiar. "They're here," I told the others, though I didn't know who they were until the first kid stepped into the dying glow of the corridor bulb. He couldn't have been more than 10, hair a wild halo of static, freckles across the bridge of his nose, like spilled pepper. He wore a faded NASA tee, 2 sizes too big, sleeves rolled up to show stick-figure arms. He pointed at my face like I'd just stepped out of a museum exhibit. "Yo, you're late, old-timer. Cycle 48 is supposed to start at 0100 tomorrow." His English was flawless, accent drifting somewhere between East Coast skate park and Saturday morning cartoon. Behind him, more shapes emerged, 12, maybe 15 children, every one of them stuck at the edge of puberty, eyes bright with mischief and exhaustion in equal measure. A girl with braided yarn bracelets nudged the boy aside. She studied each of us in turn, then nodded with solemn finality. "Welcome back, ancestors. We kept your plaza warm." Her voice cracked on the last syllable, the only reminder that these throats hadn't aged past 12 summers, even though something ancient peered out from behind her irises. Saito raised a cautious hand. "How long have you been waiting?" The girl shrugged, yarn clacking softly. 47 loops, give or take the day the lights hiccuped. She spoke like she was reciting bedtime math, simple and practiced. Yet I heard the tremor beneath, like a violin string pulled too tight, vibrating with every heartbeat. They led us down stairwells that spiraled tighter than seashells, past murals drawn in fluorescent marker, stick-figure astronauts holding hands with stick-figure kids under a blue-green earth that none of these children had ever seen. I asked where their parents were. The yarn girl? She said her name was Juno, just laughed, a sound like glass marbles spilling across tile. "We're the children of the loop." The grown-ups recycled themselves into the city's bones ages ago. We stay small so the city keeps breathing. The absurdity tasted metallic on my tongue, but the cinnamon smell kept me anchored. We emerged into a sub-level plaza lit by strands of Christmas lights someone had soldered directly into the bulkheads. Tattered hammocks swung between support beams like abandoned spiderwebs. In the center, a cracked fountain bled rust across the tiles, but water still trickled. Thin, silver, musical. Juno hopped onto the rim and beckoned us closer. From her pocket she produced a Polaroid, edges curled with humidity. My heart did the thing hearts aren't supposed to do. Skipped, staggered, tried to apologize. The photo showed the five of us standing in this exact plaza. Same rust fountain behind us, same constellation of Christmas bulbs overhead. Tomorrow's date glared from the white border in blocky Sharpie ink. Even the scuff mark on my left boot matched. Saito's hand shook as he took the picture. "We haven't posed for this yet," he whispered. Juno's grin was all teeth, no warmth. "You will. You always do. Then you'll forget until the next cycle, and we'll remind you with the same snapshot." She patted the fountain's edge like it was a loyal dog. Around and around. Keeps us safe. I asked the question burning holes in my chest. "Why kids? Why freeze you here?" A boy with a chipped front tooth answered, voice soft, almost reverent. "The city remembers pain in adult bodies. Kids forget faster. So every loop resets us to before the bad stuff sticks." He rubbed his knee, skin raw, though no blood showed. "We heal quick. We remember just enough to guide you." The cinnamon scent grew sharper, like someone had snapped a gum stick in half under my nose. They offered us dinner, foil packets labeled tangy pizza bites and galactic gushers, brands I hadn't seen since the early 2000s. We ate anyway, sitting cross-legged on threadbare blankets that smelled of attic dust and dryer sheets. The kids sang then, a round robin of pop choruses from my own teen years, voices layering like nesting dolls. I caught myself humming along to a tune I hated back in high school, but here it felt like prayer. When the plates were empty, Juno pulled me aside. The others stayed clustered around the fountain, trading jokes and outdated slang. She pressed something cold into my palm. An old iPod classic, screen spiderwebbed yet glowing faintly. "Track 7, she murmured. "Listen after lights out. Then decide if you want to break the loop or feed it." Her fingers lingered a second too long, warm, trembling. "Please choose better this time." The city above us groaned, distant machinery cycling like a heartbeat preparing for restart. I pocketed the iPod, pulse racing. Juno stepped back, suddenly shy, suddenly just a kid again. "Lights out in 5, she announced to the plaza. "Everyone into hammocks. The ancestors need rest before tomorrow's photo." The children scattered, laughter echoing off steel beams like birds trapped in a silo. I lay in a hammock strung between two coolant pipes, staring at the colored bulbs above. Saito breathed steadily to my left, already drifting, but my mind refused to shut down. 47 loops, a photograph from tomorrow, cinnamon ghosts. I slid the earbuds in, thumbed track 7, and pressed play. A child's voice, my own voice at age 9, flooded my ears, narrating memories I'd never lived. The first time the city decided children were safer than adults, the day we volunteered to forget, the last argument with parents who aged themselves into the walls to keep us young. Each word pulsed like an IV drip of someone else's childhood. Tears stung, unwelcome. The loop wasn't just a reset. It was a bargain written in juvenile bone and adult ash. The track ended on a single whispered sentence. "There's a key under the fountain. Use it before the flash." I yanked the earbuds free, heart hammering. The plaza was quiet now, hammocks swaying gently, children breathing in perfect unison, like a lullaby sung by ghosts. I slipped from the hammock, bare feet cold against the tiles. The fountain gurgled its metallic lullaby. My fingers traced the cracked rim until they found a loose stone. Beneath it lay a brass key green with age, teeth worn smooth by countless thumbs. I lifted it, and somewhere above us the city exhaled a sound like a mother recognizing her runaway child. Behind me, Juno's voice floated soft as dust. If you open the grate tonight, the loop breaks. If you wait till morning, the photo takes us back to zero. She was a silhouette against the Christmas glow, small shoulders squared. Your choice, ancestor, but remember, every version of you who hesitated is still down here, humming pop songs and never growing up. The sound cracked, too old for her throat. I tightened my grip on the key, metal biting flesh. Above us, the coolant pipes began their nightly countdown, a low thrumming that always preceded the flash. Somewhere in the dark, a Polaroid camera whirred to life, ready to steal tomorrow and staple it to yesterday. The grate waited, water lapping at its edges like a tongue tasting secrets. And that's when the lights flickered red, once, twice. The signal that the loop was locking its jaws. I had seconds. The key felt heavier than planetary mass. Juno's silhouette didn't move, but I heard her heart anyway, beating time for 47 eternities. Choose, choose, choose. The grate stayed closed this time. I never turned the key, so the loop never opened its throat to swallow me. Instead, Juno and I stood motionless while the coolant pipes hammered out their metallic countdown. At zero, the station lights didn't flash. They simply sighed out, leaving only the pale violet glow of the cliff text seeping through the observation blister above us. Juno's breathing sounded like rain against tin. "It's different," she whispered. "Look, the last line." She pointed at the blister where the ancient symbols crawled like phosphorescent worms. My eyes traced the familiar pattern, the same 43 words we had memorized across lifetimes, until I reached the final fragment. There had always been 43. Tonight, there were 44. A single new syllable pulsed at the edge. "Then remember us." My stomach folded like bad origami. When did that appear? I asked, though time in the loop was a broken compass. Juno only shook her head, the motion slow, as if underwater. We both knew the implications were heavier than neutronium. The message wasn't carved. It was growing. I pulled the old logbook from my coat, pages swollen with spilled coffee and centuries of fingerprints. Every loop I had copied the cliff text exactly, down to the curl of each glyph. I flipped to the most recent entry. 43 symbols, no more, no less. Yet above us, the cliff gleamed with 44. Either my notes were lying, or reality was editing itself. Juno's voice dropped to that low register she only used when she spoke of her daughter, the one the loop kept forgetting. "Park, what if each added syllable is a whole timeline, compressed?" Like a zip file made of blood and years. The idea landed between us like a hot coal. I felt the burn travel up my spine. I tried to picture the math. If one new syllable equaled one complete iteration of the loop, all its triumphs, deaths, sunrises, betrayals, then our current 44 syllables held more experience than a galaxy of civilizations. No wonder the station felt haunted. It was crowded with ghosts we hadn't lived yet. The coolant pipes thrummed again, but softer now, almost a lullaby. Juno placed her palm against the blister. "To break the loop, we have to finish the sentence," she said. "We must write the next word. Give the archive the syllable it's missing." Simple, right? Just add one word and collapse eternity. Except the cliff refused to prompt us. The glowing line waited, patient as death, but offered no hint of what should follow. U.S. I felt the pressure building behind my eyes, a sinus headache carved by paradox. We retreated to the archive chamber, where the walls were lined with Polaroids, strung on thin wire. Each photograph showed the same moment. Juno holding the camera, me reaching for the lens. Yet subtle details shifted. A different bruise on my cheek, a missing button on her coat. 43 variations so far. I dreaded the 44th. Juno plucked the newest photo from the drying line. In it, her eyes were closed, tears frozen on lashes I hadn't seen wet in any previous cycle. "Look," she murmured, "I'm crying before it happens." The picture trembled in her grip, like a captured bird. I forced myself to count the glyphs again, aloud this time. When I reached the final phrase, my voice cracked on the last syllable. The cliff shimmered, almost approvingly. "Maybe the next word isn't spoken," I said. "Maybe it's chosen." Juno turned the Polaroid over. On the back, in her own handwriting, were the words, "I'm sorry." But she swore she hadn't written them. I felt the floor tilt under that confession, as though gravity had taken a vote and we lost. We spent the next 6 cycles, or 6 seconds, hard to tell, arguing possibilities. Could we will the word into existence? Could we trick the loop by misspelling it? I even suggested writing banana, just to see the universe flinch. Juno did not laugh. She stared at the newest Polaroid until her reflection in its glossy surface began to move independently, mouthing something we couldn't hear. At the 7th attempt, I pressed my forehead to the blister and whispered, "What comes after us?" The cliff brightened, but only for a heartbeat. Then, the station intercom crackled, an old analog pop, like a vinyl record being born, and a voice that might have been mine said, "Remember what you've forgotten." Juno gasped, dropping the Polaroid. The photo landed face up, and the image was already different. Now both our mouths were open in silent screams. The bruise on my cheek was gone, replaced by a glyph-shaped burn. I touched my face. The skin was hot. Time folded again. When it unfolded, we were back at the blister, 44 syllables blazing like violet fireflies. Juno looked at me with eyes suddenly ancient. "I think the word is your name," she said. "But I have worn so many names, across so many loops, that I no longer know which one belongs to the first version of me." I stepped forward, hand raised to trace the next absent syllable. My fingertips tingled. The cliff felt warmer than skin. Somewhere inside the loop, the Polaroid camera clicked. I did not hear the shutter. I heard only Juno's breathing, ragged and final. "Say it," she urged. But the word lodged behind my tongue like a stone. I tasted copper, ozone, and every goodbye I never spoke. The cliff pulsed brighter, demanding tribute. I opened my mouth. Nothing came. Then, oof, the intercom voice returned, clearer now, no longer mine. It spoke a single syllable that sounded like wind through bones. The cliff accepted it. The 45th glyph ignited, but the word was not mine. It belonged to the loop itself, and it had written us out. I felt my memories peel away like old paint, layer by layer. Juno reached for me, her fingers passing through my wrist as if I were smoke. The last thing I saw was the Polaroid fluttering to the ground. On it, 2 empty spaces stood where we used to be, and beneath, in fresh ink, a new phrase began to form. "If they forget." I never got to finish the sentence. The story did it for me, and the next chapter starts without us. The Polaroid lay at my feet, that last ominous phrase still forming like frost across its surface. "If they forget." Huh? The sentence was writing itself, glowing violet, as though the corridor itself had lungs and was exhaling prophecy. I looked up. The statue waited, 10 meters tall, carved from the same glassy obsidian that had swallowed the children's faces. Whatever courage I had left, I borrowed from the echo of a mother I never met. I stepped forward. The tablet embedded in the statue's chest pulsed once, like a dying star, remembering it once had a name. The air smelled of copper and ozone, the taste of every memory I'd already lost twice. A thin filament of light unspooled from the tablet, resolving into what looked like an old fountain pen, if a pen could be made of sunrise. It floated toward my hand, weightless, yet heavier than regret. When my fingers closed around it, the corridor dimmed, as though the universe leaned in to watch. The stylus spoke without voice. "Write what must end," it said, "or refuse and begin again." I felt the words crawl under my skin like warm snowflakes. Every pulse of the pen showed me 2 futures flickering, one where Earth bloomed green and forgot us, one where the loop cradled humanity forever like a child that refuses to walk. My knees buckled. I had sworn not to cry, yet tears arrived uninvited, carrying the salt of every recycled century. "Why me?" I asked the statue, but the statue only reflected my own face split in 2, half resolution, half surrender. I pressed the stylus to the tablet. The surface yielded like warm wax, ancient characters spiraling outward. Each symbol looked familiar, a déjà vu alphabet I'd spoken in dreams I could never remember upon waking. The pen tugged at something deeper than muscle, pulling intent from marrow. The word forming at the tip of my thought wasn't stop, or end, or even love. It was forgive. I felt it rise, syllable by syllable, a bridge made of light trying to span an abyss of guilt. Wait, I said aloud, though no one answered. Forgive who? Them? Me? The loop itself? The stylus answered only by accelerating, letters burning brighter. My wrist moved without permission, guided by the same gravity that had dragged us through 10 millennia of echoes. First came the F, a doorway of fire. Then the O, an open mouth. The R, coiled like a serpent around my wrist. The G wrapped my ribs. The I slipped into my throat. The V cracked open my sternum. The E spread like wings behind my shoulder blades. It tickled, it terrified. It felt like signing my own birth certificate in reverse. With the final stroke, warmth turned to weightlessness. I looked down and couldn't find my feet. Or rather, they were there, just unraveling into motes of pale gold. The particles rose like embers from a campfire. Every mote a memory I had chosen to release. I expected pain, but what arrived was relief so pure it felt like the first honest breath after centuries of pretending to breathe. The corridor brightened, not with sterile LED, but with dawn bleeding through the cracks of a world that hadn't seen morning in 10,000 years. Behind me, the statue cracked along its mirrored cheek. From within came a sound, half heartbeat, half lullaby, echoing the rhythm of every human who had ever stood beneath alien stars and still called them home. I tried to speak, but my mouth had already scattered. The stylus remained, hovering where my hand had been, its tip still dripping the afterglow of the word. It rotated slowly, like a compass seeking one last direction, then pointed back toward the corridor I'd walked. Someone else was coming. I felt their footsteps through the particles that used to be my nerves. The Polaroid stirred, lifting in a breeze that tasted of salt and spring. I wanted to warn them, to say, choose sooner, but language was now beyond me. The last thing I perceived, beyond color, beyond sound, was the sensation of being read like a book whose final page had just been turned. And then even that sensation folded in on itself, a letter returning to its envelope. Darkness did not fall. It simply remembered it was never needed in the presence of so much light. Somewhere, a heartbeat slowed, another quickened. The loop hiccuped, faltered, paused, and in the pause, something new exhaled. I wish I could tell you what happens when forgiveness ends recursion, but the story is no longer mine to tell. It's yours now. Take the pen. The loop exhaled, and I felt it in my bones, like a long-held breath finally released. The golden particles from the corridor doorway didn't drift away into space. They turned, mid-air, and began to spiral back. Toward us, toward the cliff, toward the word that had just been completed. The letters, those ancient impossible glyphs, shimmered once, then they simply let go. Each character dissolved into a fine, luminous dust that didn't fall, but rose. The cliff itself followed suit, shearing away in sheets of memory and time, until nothing remained but a smooth, untouched slope of green. Like it had never been carved at all. I stumbled back, boots sinking into soil that hadn't been there moments before. The spiral city, once a skeletal ruin of metal and regret, began to hum, not with machinery, with life. Vines burst through cracked alloy. Trees unfurled from the bones of towers. Water, clear and singing, poured from the mouths of broken statues. The city wasn't rebuilding, it was remembering. The children, oh, the children. They stood in a circle, barefoot in the grass that hadn't existed an hour ago. Their eyes, once wide with the weight of inherited memory, now narrowed with purpose. Their limbs lengthened. Their voices deepened. I watched a girl no older than 10 stretch into a woman with captain stripes on her shoulder. Another, who had cried in his sleep for a mother he never knew, now stood tall and unblinking, his jaw set like steel. They weren't growing. They were returning. I recognized them, not from the mission logs or the genetic manifests, from the mirror, from the way I held my own hands when I was scared. The woman with the captain's stripes, she had my mother's eyes. The man beside her, my father's stubborn chin. I wasn't watching a crew reborn. I was watching myself, fractured and reassembled across 10,000 years of guilt and hope. They never left Earth. The voice came from behind me, soft as wind through leaves. I turned, but no one stood there. Just the drone feed, flickering in midair like a dying star. The feed pulsed, once, twice. Then it sharpened. There she was, the Prometheus Dawn, not in orbit around Kepler 9c, not halfway across the galaxy, still docked, still waiting. The crew, our crew, sat at their stations, unchanged, unaged, unaware. The journey had never begun. The crash, the deaths, the loops, the warnings, they were never real. They were seeded, implanted. A memory passed forward like a torch, not across space, but across time. We weren't explorers. We were echoes. Echoes of a warning that hadn't happened yet. I looked back at the transformed city. The adults, us, me, them, stood in silence. Not triumphant, not relieved, just waiting. For what? I stepped forward, but my foot didn't land on soil. It landed on something harder, colder, metal. The grass vanished, the sky blinked. I was back inside. Not the cliff, not the planet, the ship, the real one, the one that never launched. I spun around, heart in my throat, and saw the corridor stretching ahead, sterile and familiar. The same corridor from the memory, the same door, the same light. But this time, I wasn't alone. They stepped forward. Not a child, not an adult, something in between. Their face? No, I won't describe it. You'll see it soon enough. In the mirror, in your dreams, in the pause between heartbeats. They raised a hand, not to stop me, to invite me. I took a step, then another. The corridor stretched, or maybe I shrank. Hard to tell when time itself is negotiable. The doorway ahead pulsed, not with light, but with memory. Mine, yours, ours. And just as I reached the threshold, the figure leaned in, close enough that I felt their breath, though neither of us truly breathed anymore. It was never about the journey. It was about what you'd become once you remembered you never took it. The stars blinked once, twice. Then they rearranged themselves into a pattern I'd seen before. On the cliff, in the word, in the spiral. I reached out. The stars reached back. And then, nothing. Or maybe, everything. My first breath tasted like recycled air, metallic and too clean. I opened my eyes to white ceiling panels humming with soft fluorescent light, the drone of ventilation fans a lullaby I hadn't heard in 10,000 years. My fingers flexed, numb yet tingling, as though the sleep had lasted minutes, not millennia. Somewhere down the corridor, a voice, no, a chorus, cheered. Contact confirmed. Kepler 9c is habitable. I sat up, heart hammering against ribs that remembered weightlessness a moment ago. I swung my legs over the side of the pod. The deck plating felt warm, impossibly so, like someone had preheated the entire ship for a celebration. And maybe they had. A calendar on the wall said 2047, exactly 2 centuries after launch, not the yawning 10,000 I carried in my bones. My reflection in a polished bulkhead showed hair longer, streaked with premature silver that framed a face somehow older by 10 winters. Yet the only scar was a single tear-shaped mark beneath my left eye where the stylus had kissed me goodbye. Footsteps, boots on metal, approached at a jog. Commander Saito? The young officer's uniform bore fresh creases, the insignia of a mission control that shouldn't exist anymore. Welcome back. The planet's everything we hoped. Oceans, continents, a breathable mix. We're calling it Terra Nova. If only he knew he was christening our tombstone. I managed a nod, throat dry, tasting the irony like copper. I followed him through passages I remembered assembling in orbit over a blue marble that now had no record of ever having been called Earth. Every screen repeated the same headline, Historic Achievement, First Human Footfall on Kepler 9c, next week. The date stamp on the mission logs behind reinforced glass read 10,000 years prior, yet the ink looked wet. I touched the scar. It pulsed once, faintly warm. They ushered me to a debriefing chamber where flags of nations long dissolved hung like museum ghosts. A holo recording began, grainy footage of a probe descending through rose-gold skies, landing on grasslands that matched the ones I had walked as bones. Applause thundered from unseen crowds. Somewhere a child asked, "Will we meet the natives?" The natives are dust, kid, and dust remembers. Project lead Dr. Halden slid a cup of coffee across the table. Real coffee, not the synth sludge I recalled. Steam curled like forgotten prayers. We owe this triumph to the telemetry your team uploaded centuries ago. Guidance vectors, atmospheric specs, ecological blueprints, astonishing detail. He tapped the scar on my file photo absent-mindedly, not realizing it was still attached to living flesh. I wonder what else they'd pulled from my ghost. I asked to see the raw data. They obliged, proud parents showing baby pictures. The star charts overlaying Kepler 9c were precise, down to the placement of every river delta I had mourned. Yet embedded between lines of code, I spotted fragments of my own handwriting. Panic loops scrawled on the night the sky cracked. They read it as calibration notes. The universe has a sick sense of humor. Night cycle dimmed the corridors to amber. I slipped away, guided by muscle memory to a storage bay I hoped still existed. Behind crates labeled legacy hardware, I found it, a small obsidian box, no bigger than a paperback, warm like living skin. The surface rippled when I brushed the scar against it, sinking like two halves of a broken locket. Numbers flared across its face. Countdown or invitation, I couldn't tell. Back in my assigned quarters, I lay on a bunk that smelled of new polymer. Through the viewport, the planet hung like a jewel, sunset bleeding across oceans I had sailed as vapor. A voice crackled over comms. Prep for descent at 0600. You'll make history as the first to set foot. First, again, the scar pulsed, syncing with the planet's rotation, as though it recognized its maker. I dreamt, if that's what this was, of golden particles drifting through black water, each one a memory I'd already lived. They spelled a question in the dark. What happens when the future forgets the past is watching? I woke with the taste of salt on my lips, though I'd eaten nothing. The scar bled a single drop of liquid starlight that soaked into the pillow and vanished. Before dawn, I visited the observation dome. Empty seats, coffee gone cold. Outside, the planet turned, continents sliding past like ancient regrets. I pressed the obsidian box to the glass. The surface of Kepler 9c flickered once, revealing for a heartbeat the outline of continents I recognized as home, our original Earth, superimposed like a ghost image. Deja vu with interest. Footsteps again, softer this time. Halden's silhouette. Couldn't sleep? He asked. I shrugged, wordless. He continued, funny thing, radiometric dating of the first soil samples shows the crust is exactly 10,000 years old. Like it cooled yesterday, he chuckled, unaware the joke was on us. Yesterday was a long time ago, Doctor. I pocketed the box and smiled, small and sad. Maybe the planet's just eager to please. Halden laughed, clapped me on the shoulder, and left. The moment he vanished, the scar burned cold, and the obsidian cube vibrated. A new sequence appeared, a set of coordinates on Kepler 9c's largest continent, right where, once upon a forever, I buried the stylus that started all this. Tomorrow they'll cheer as I descend. They'll film my boot touching virgin soil, never knowing it's a reunion. I'll smile for cameras, recite the script, and all the while the scar will itch, the box will whisper, and somewhere beneath those alien planes, a stylus waits to finish writing the warning we forgot to read. I wonder what happens when the ink runs out. The last drone dipped through the violent dusk like a moth hunting starlight. I watched from the ridge, gloved hand brushing the fresh scar that still whispered my own voice back at me. Below, the single machine wheeled once, twice, then settled into a lazy orbit above the cliff face we once called the mirror wall. Its lens glinted, a lone eye refusing to blink. I knew why it lingered. The others had already boarded the ascent shuttle, cheering their clean boots and unbroken hearts. They would tell the story of a pristine planet, a blank slate, a second Eden. None of them felt the planet breathing beneath their souls. None of them heard the low murmur of memory rising like tide. The drone knew better. It had been mine before I became part of its memory, and I had programmed it to search for endings that refused to end. It banked closer to the cliff, thrusters whispering. There, halfway up, a seam no wider than a hairline cracked the perfect stone. I had stood there 10,000 years ago, or was it yesterday, pressing my stylus into that same seam while my blood cooled and my voice echoed, "Leave a warning that outlives bone." The drone spotlight pooled over the fissure, and I felt the scar on my wrist throb in recognition, a pulse answering a pulse. Inside that crack, something began to right itself. I didn't need to lean in. The letters etched across my skin the same moment they etched across the stone. IF. The word shimmered, phosphor bright. You. The drone's camera word, autofocus hunting, red. I tasted copper in memory. This. A pause, as though the planet waited for applause. I wanted to scream, to laugh, to beg it to stop, but the stylus that never ran out of ink kept scratching. Instead, I spoke aloud, voice cracked by exile and return. I already read it. I wrote it. I forgot it. I remembered. Each confession echoed off the cliff like an accusation. The drone tilted, capturing the confession for whatever future would listen. The letters continued, smaller now, threading deeper. They were not the same words I had carved. That was the joke, the cosmic punchline. The warning had learned, evolved, twisted itself into something gentler, more dangerous. It no longer screamed, "Turn back." It murmured, "Welcome home." I felt my knees buckle inside the suit, servos humming to keep me upright. The cliff forgave nothing, not even its author. Somewhere behind me, the shuttle engine cycled up, a low harmony of farewell. I pictured the others, strapping in, exchanging congratulations, sipping recycled water laced with celebration. They would leave no footprints, that was the rule. But rules are just stories we agree to pretend are stone. My boot prints were already fossilizing under 1 billion silent years. The drone's battery icon blinked crimson. Time to return. Time to ascend. Time to pretend this was the beginning, instead of the ending. We never finished. Yet it hovered still, lens fixed on the fissure where words kept blooming like frost. I stepped closer, magnetized. The cliff face smelled of iron and petrichor. Impossible scents carried across impossible spans. Letters formed a question now. Do you forgive us? Us. Not me. Us. The planet, its ghosts, the 10,000 generations who came after and never knew whose bones dusted their soil. My throat closed. I tasted salt that wasn't mine. The stylus answered for me, carving, "I was always here." A confession, a surrender, a benediction. I reached out, glove brushing the seam. The scar on my wrist split open, not with pain, but with memory rushing out like song. Images flooded, towers of glass, rivers of flame, a child's laughter turning to static. I saw every warning ever written, every warning ever ignored. And beneath it all, the same tiny letters, rewritten again and again, patient as glaciers. The drone lurched, rotors sputtering, one last frame to capture. I leaned my helmet against the warm stone, listening. Not to words anymore, but to the hush between them. That hush was the true message. Memory survives not by shouting, but by waiting. 10,000 years is a blink to rock, a sigh to stars. I whispered into the cliff, voice cracking like thawing ice. I remember you. Remember me. The stylus answered with silence, its task complete. The letters dimmed until only a heartbeat of light remained. The drone's rotors stopped. It dropped, clattered, lay still at my boots. A silver bird that had flown across epochs to witness the last echo return to its throat. I looked up. The shuttle arc burned gold against the dark, carrying friends who would age in months, while I aged in millennia. I did not wave. Instead, I knelt, picked up the lifeless drone, and set it gently inside the fissure. A perfect fit, a coffin for a machine that had carried our voices farther than light. The cliff closed around it with a sound like pages turning. I sensed the planet lean closer, listening. My breath fogged the visor, and for a moment the universe balanced on that cloud. Then I removed my glove. Cold air kissed bare skin. I placed my palm flat against the stone. The scar flared once, a match struck an eternity, and went dark. The itch stopped. The whisper stopped. The box inside my chest unlocked and emptied. Above, the shuttle became a star among stars. Below, the cliff cooled, sated. I stood between, neither leaving nor staying, simply remembering. The stylus had etched its final period, but I felt the story continue in the hush, in the slow grind of tectonic patience. Someday, someone else's scar would itch. Someday, another boot would print this dust. The cliff would open again. The drone would lift again. The words would write themselves again. And again, and again. I pressed my forehead to the stone, a kiss for what endures. Cycle broken, I murmured. Memory unbroken. The planet answered with stillness so complete I could hear my own heart echoing off moons I would never see. I smiled then, a small thing, soft as starlight. Humanity always writes back. We cannot help it. Our ink is longing. Behind me, the fissure sealed until it was only a line, then less than a line, then nothing. Yet I carried it in every step, a door folded small enough to fit behind my eyes. The stylus had stopped, but the sound kept scratching in my mind, not stone on stone, but hope on hope. Listen closely. It never ends. I halted at the crest where sky curved down to meet tomorrow. One more breath of alien air, one more heartbeat to measure eternity. I spoke into the dark, voice steady now. Tell them I stayed to read the part we always leave blank. The cliff did not reply. It had already begun forgetting me. That, too, was part of the gift. I turned my face toward the stars and let the sound of scratching stone fade, until it became the gentle hush of waves that never were. Somewhere, a new fissure already dreams of opening. Somewhere, a stylus sharpens itself on the promise of our return. Memory is patient, and humanity, bless our stubborn hearts, always writes back.